They said I was too old to be useful, that I slowed things down. What they didn't say, but made sure I heard loud and clear, was that they didn't want a guy with oil-stained hands and a limp walking around their shiny new shop.
My name is Ray Dalton.
I'm 61 years old, and I've been fixing engines longer than the new manager's been alive. I was replacing a worn-out fan belt on a Peterbilt when Mason, tall, smooth, MBA slick, tapped me on the shoulder like I was some confused grandpa. "Ray," he said, "let's grab a quick chat in my office." My stomach sank. You don't get pulled into the office for a chat unless you're getting pulled out of the building right after. He smiled as he talked. "It's not about performance," he said. "We just want to modernize. Create a leaner team dynamic. You've been invaluable, of course, but—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I was being replaced by 3 kids with iPads and YouTube certifications. I wiped my hands on a rag and looked at him for a long time. "You ever change a timing belt on a diesel without a manual?" I asked. He blinked. "No," he admitted. "Didn't think so." But I didn't fight it. Didn't throw a fit or threaten to sue. Just nodded, went back to my locker, and started packing up 30 years of experience into a cardboard box like it was nothing more than clutter. I spent my first few days out of work waking up at 5 a.m. out of habit, drinking burnt coffee in silence, staring at the Chevy engine sitting in my garage like it might talk back. My dog, Lucky, didn't understand why we weren't heading to the shop anymore. He'd pace at the door, tail wagging, waiting for a day that wasn't coming. Then the calls started. At first, it was Mike, one of the younger techs. "Hey, Ray, sorry about what happened. We're all pretty upset." Then came Luis, the only one who ever listened when I taught about analog diagnostics. "Shop's a mess without you, man. They can't even handle a basic carburetor issue without calling in outside help." I said thanks, but kept to myself. Until one night, I got a text from Mike. "Boss ordered some software updates on the truck fleet. Now half of them won't start. They're saying it's an integration issue." Total BS. I stared at that message for a long time. Integration issue, huh? More like they tried to digitize a system built to survive a war zone, and didn't think it might fight back. I didn't respond, but something in my gut told me this was just the beginning. The next morning, I opened the garage like I always used to. Not the shop, just my own, attached to the side of the house, cluttered with projects I never had time for. But this time I cleaned the workbench, pulled the tarp off that old M35 deuce and a half I'd been restoring, and got to work like something inside me had been reactivated. I hadn't touched that truck since Linda passed away, but now it felt like therapy. One bolt at a time. Steel, grit, and silence. That evening, Mike stopped by. Uninvited, but not unwelcome. "They're desperate," he said without sitting. "Fleet's down. One of the freight contracts is on the line. They called in a diagnostics team from corporate, and those guys couldn't make sense of anything." I raised an eyebrow. "You don't say." Mike leaned in. "They updated the software on half the rigs to try and optimize fuel mapping. Didn't realize the original ECUs were custom calibrated by you back in '09. Now the trucks think they're supposed to idle at sea level when they're climbing 8% grades." I chuckled. Sounds about right. Mason's still walking around like he knows what a torque wrench is. Mike nodded grimly. "Worse, he's blaming the old setup. Said your modifications were non-standard and incompatible with modern logistics platforms." I turned back to my workbench, picked up a wrench, and stared at it for a long moment. Did he mention the part where we got a 17% mileage increase using those non-standard calibrations over a 10-year average? Mike gave a tight grin. "Nope. Selective memory." He hesitated at the door. "You know, if you wanted to swing by, even just to look at one of the trucks." I'm not going back, I said without turning. They made a choice. Let 'em live with it. After he left, I sat with Lucky on the back porch and watched the sun disappear behind the trees. He rested his head on my boot, like he always used to during late shifts. I lit a cigarette I'd been saving since 2003. Quitting smoking was one of the few good habits I'd picked up after the war. But some nights, you let old vices visit like distant friends. That night, I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about the supply lines we used to maintain overseas. Convoys with 3 backup routes, redundant comms, and systems designed not just to run, but to survive sabotage, terrain, and incompetence. I'd brought that mentality into every machine I ever touched. And now it was all coming undone because some kid with a tablet wanted efficiency charts. At 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. Mr. Dalton? My name's Emily Tran. I run dispatch at Jessler Freight. We use your old fleet. We've got 8 semis down, and a 72-hour delivery contract hanging by a thread. Mike says you're the only one who can fix this. She didn't beg. She didn't flatter. She just told me the truth. And I hadn't heard that in a long time. I met Emily Tran the next morning in the Jessler Freight lot, just as the sun scraped over the rooftops. She was younger than I expected, early 30s maybe, but there was steel in her eyes. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Fleet's down to 40% operable. 2 shipments already late. Mason's blaming legacy systems and pointing fingers at the drivers. She handed me a clipboard. I pulled all error logs. None of it adds up. I flipped through the sheets, frowning. Fuel injection cycles out of sync. ECM faults that shouldn't be possible. Like the trucks were confused about what they were. You let them flash the firmware across the whole fleet? I asked. She nodded grimly. New policy. Uniform optimization, they called it. Mason greenlit it last month. Didn't even run it by my team. I sighed. They installed civilian-grade logic on military-tough rigs. These engines don't want to be told what to do, they want to be respected. She stared at me like I'd just said something holy. Can you fix it? I thought about saying no, about walking away. But something about her reminded me of people I used to lead.
Calmander Prescher.
Determined. So I pulled a set of gloves from my jacket pocket. Clear a bay. The first truck was a mess. The new system had overwritten critical boot parameters, corrupted half the sensors, and locked the failsafes. But I built these things with traps, fail-open sequences designed to revert back to default under the right conditions. I wrote them when we were sending vehicles into war zones where satellite comms could vanish any second. Took me 3 hours to resurrect the first rig. When I turned the key and heard that engine rumble back to life like an angry dog remembering how to bark, Emily let out a shaky breath. How did you? I just shook my head. They didn't break the trucks. They just confused them. By nightfall, we had 5 more rigs online. Word must have gotten around fast, because drivers started showing up just to shake my hand. A few even brought me coffee. Real coffee. Not the watery stuff I used to drink in the break room. One of the newer techs from the old shop showed up late in the evening. A kid named Connor. Always had a good work ethic, even if he relied too much on diagnostics tools. They're blaming you for the crash, he said quietly. Told corporate you built a fragile system and didn't leave any documentation. I smirked. They're right about one thing. I didn't leave documentation. Because I wasn't done building. He hesitated, then handed me a thumb drive. I made a backup of your old calibration files before they wiped the servers. Figured you might want them. That stopped me cold. Why'd you do that? I asked.
Estrag.
Because I saw the way the trucks ran when you were in charge. and I've never seen anything work that smooth since. I took the drive. It weighed nothing, but it felt like the past coming home. The next morning, Emily was waiting at the garage bay before I even arrived. Gessler's CEO is flying in tonight, she said. We've got 7 trucks back online, but we need at least 10 if we're going to save the West Ridge contract. I nodded. We'll get there. I wasn't sure if I believed it, but Lucky had curled up next to my toolbox like it was his old spot at the shop. That felt like a sign. The next truck was one of the newer models, heavily digitized with sensors for everything but common sense. Whoever installed the update tried to force it into a one-size-fits-all calibration. The result? The engine was choking itself at every throttle change. I cracked open the housing, rerouted a thermal sensor, and dug out a set of handwritten notes I hadn't looked at in years. My own private field manual, compiled from war zones, breakdowns, and long-haul repairs across 4 states and 2 countries.
Every pagina story.
Emily peeked over my shoulder at the scrawl. That your handwriting?
Yeah.
I kept waiting for someone to ask me to write it all down. Nobody ever did. By noon, the truck was purring like it should have from day one. I climbed out from under the rig and saw a black BMW pull into the lot. Mason. He stepped out like he still owned the place, flanked by 2 suits from corporate and a face I hadn't seen in years. Derek Price, their regional operations director. A man who once told me I had the tactical charm of a wrench. I took it as a compliment. Ray, Mason said, voice honey slick but tight around the edges. I heard you've been tinkering. Fixing, I said. You know, that thing mechanics used to do before algorithms. He ignored that. You don't work here anymore. You're in violation of several NDAs. Emily stepped up beside me. He's volunteering on private property. We haven't paid him a dime. Mason turned to the suits. This is what I warned you about. Legacy systems, undocumented changes, personnel liabilities. He built a house of cards. But Derek looked past Mason, toward the lineup of working trucks and drivers ready to roll. And yet, he's the only one who got anything running. Why's that, Mason? Mason opened his mouth, then closed it. His smile flickered. Derek turned to me. We've got 15 hours to deliver 40 tons of freight or we lose the contract. Can you get 3 more trucks online? I can try, I said, but I'll need full access, calibration files, bypass codes, and I want Luis and Connor in here helping. Derek nodded once.
You've got it.
Mason started to protest, but Derek silenced him with a glance. And Mason, you're officially out of the loop. Go wait in the office.
Try not to break anything else.
Mason stalked off, red-faced. I turned back to the bay, adrenaline humming. I hadn't felt like this since Kandahar. Not fear, not pride. Just focus. 3 more trucks. 12 hours. Let's see if the old man still had it. By nightfall, the lot looked like a forward operating base. Floodlights buzzed overhead. Luis and Connor worked shoulder to shoulder, knee-deep in diagnostic ports and wiring looms. Emily coordinated drivers like a battlefield commander. And me? I was in the zone, wrench in one hand, tablet in the other, the calibration files from Connor's thumb drive loaded up and whispering secrets I hadn't heard in years. One of the trucks had a corrupted firmware sector. Normally that'd mean scrapping the control unit. But I built a failsafe into the legacy harness.
A manual override, hidden in plain sight.
Something Mason would have deleted if he'd known it was there. I flipped the toggle, waited 6 seconds, and turned the ignition. The truck coughed, stuttered, then roared back to life like a dragon remembering its fire.
That's Nine, Emily called out.
One more. The last truck, #47, was the most beat up of the bunch. I knew that rig. I'd rebuilt its engine after a runaway downshift sheared the flywheel back in 2015. It still had a lucky coin I'd wedged into the dash seam for the superstitious driver. Now it was just me and the machine. Old metal. Stubborn, tired, but not done.
Kind of like me.
I worked in silence, Lucky curled up behind me, snoring softly. I didn't look at the clock. I just worked, tuned, breathed. At 5:02 a.m., the final engine rumbled to life. 10 rigs. Ready to roll. Emily stood beside me, hands on her hips, eyes wide. Ray, you did it. No, I said. We did. The trucks pulled out in formation, headlights slicing the darkness. On time. Fully operational. A convoy like something out of my past, but this one wasn't headed into war. It was headed toward proof. Later that morning, Gessler's CEO addressed the press. Called it a miracle turnaround. Said it was a testament to cross-generational expertise and the value of legacy knowledge. Corporate PR scrubbed Mason's name from every talking point. Derek offered me a consulting role on the spot. Triple my old pay. I declined. Instead, I helped Emily and Connor set up an independent diagnostics firm right next to the freight yard. Dalton Systems. They named it. We fix what automation can't. Within a month, we had a wait list 2 weeks long. Luis signed on full-time. Mike quit the old shop. Even Thomas, the grumpy ex-lead tech who once swore he'd never work for anyone again, dropped by and said, "You got room for one more?" We did. One afternoon, weeks later, I got a call from Charles Harper, one of my old war buddies, now a logistics VP out west. "Heard what you pulled off," he said. "Reminded me of that motor pool in Mosul, when the whole convoy got stranded and you rebuilt a cooling system out of 3 soda cans and a garden hose." "Different war," I replied. "Same rules." He laughed. "Still got that limp?"
Still got the wrench.
We said our goodbyes. As I hung up, Lucky barked at a butterfly and ran across the yard. I stood there for a moment, watching the trucks in the distance.
No speeches. No perads.
Just machines running right, people working together, and silence earned the hard way. They said I was too old to be useful. Turns out, I was just getting started.